Let's get into it. Episode 665 of the Sold Not For Sale podcast. We got Tucker Carlson and we got Ben Shapiro. Now, Tucker Carlson is giving his view on where he thinks America should be standing after the whole tragic events that have happened in Israel. And Israel has now taken to airstrikes of Gaza. There's all of this war, quite frankly, happening. And Tucker Carlson gives his view on where he thinks American leaders should be putting their focus and attention, as well as Vivek Ramaswamy is also going to be giving his take. And then we have Ben Shapiro, and I'm not exaggerating, we have Ben Shapiro throwing a fit towards Tucker Carlson, talking about what I'm about to show you. His view, pretty much calling Tucker Carlson out, calling him someone who is trying to minimize what's happened in Israel, almost getting to the point of you can tell Ben likes him a little too much to try and frame him as anti-Semitic. He knows better, but he's real close, real close. And I understand because emotions get really high when you are an Orthodox Jewish man and you're watching this happen in Israel, and you more than likely have friends, maybe even family there. So I get the emotional charge, but what he has to say about Tucker Carlson and his view on this, I think is completely wrong. So we're going to get into those clips right now. As I get into these clips, I'm going to be moving this black color bar around because they show some pretty graphic stuff. And I can't show that on YouTube, so bear with me while that happens. Let's get into it. Bring this down. I like doing it like this. Zoop. I like that. Let's get into it. Tucker Carlson, ladies and gentlemen.
No decent person can watch the video of young people being murdered at a music festival in southern Israel without feeling horrified. It's awful, and there's no excusing it. No matter what you think of Israel's policies in Gaza, you are not allowed to shoot people at music festivals. That's a crime. Israel has a right to respond to that crime and to defend itself. No one seriously contests that. The question for American policymakers, however, is what do we do next? How do we represent the interests of the United States in this chaotic moment? That's not a selfish question. It's the whole point of making policy for a country, to improve and protect that country. If you serve in the U.S. Congress or in the executive branch of government, you have a moral duty to think this way. It's your job. You serve the United States and its population. You have no moral authority except to the extent that you represent your fellow Americans. That's our system. It used to be obvious, but it's worth remembering now because the conflict between Israel and Hamas could escalate into a war between Iran and its allies and the West. Once a war like that starts, you could easily imagine the use of nuclear weapons and all that entails. Millions dead, the collapse of the global economy. At the very least, you could see an unprecedented energy crisis here. Already gas in one Bay Area service station hit $7.29 a gallon over the weekend. If that trend worsens and persists, the United States, which is already, technically speaking, bankrupt, would plunge into depression. And no, it would not be like the 1930s. Close to 10 million people have come here over the last 3 years from the poorest places in the world. The overwhelming majority of them are on some form of federal subsidies. You wonder how that's going to work out when the U.S. government runs out of money. So there's a lot at stake in how we encourage Israel to respond to the horrifying Hamas attacks. Wisdom and long-term thinking are essential, but you will not be surprised to learn that is not what we are getting. Watch this person, for example, who happens to be the media's pick for President of the United States.
This is not just an attack on Israel. This is an attack on America because they hate us just as much. And what we have to understand is this is the reason that we have to unite around making sure our enemies do not hurt our friends. America can never be so arrogant to think we don't need friends, just like we needed them on 9/11. That's why Ukraine needs us when Russia's doing this. That's why Israel needs us when Hamas and Iran are doing this. And I'll say this to Prime Minister Netanyahu, finish them. Finish them. Hamas did this. You know Iran's behind it. Finish them. They should have hell to pay for what they've just done.
This was an attack on America, she says, when in fact it was not. And for that reason, we must, quote, finish Iran, a nation of nearly 90 million people. What are we watching here? This is not sober leadership. She's a child, and this is the tantrum of a child, ignorant, cocksure, bloodthirsty. Yet no one in Washington scolded her for it. In fact, they aped her hysteria. Here's fellow neocon Lindsey Graham just spelling it out and calling for the bombing of Iran.
So I've been on the phone all day to the Mideast, and I've told our allies and people with connections to Iran, what I would do, I would tell Iran that if Hezbollah attacks Israel, we're going to come after you, the Iranians, and have a coordinated effort between the United States and Israel to put Iran out of the oil business by destroying their refineries. There are 4 major refineries in Iran. They're fixed targets. If Hezbollah attacks Israel, I would make Iran pay a heavy price.
What exactly would happen to the United States if we declared war on Iran and started blowing up their infrastructure? Lindsey Graham has no clue what would happen. He hasn't thought it through. He's almost 70 years old and he has no children. He doesn't care. But neither, amazingly, do most of his colleagues in Washington. They're as reckless as he is. Texas Congressman Dan Crenshaw took to social media to call for what he described as a war to end all wars, as if there is such a thing. But of course, there isn't such a thing. Wars beget more war. The bigger the conflict, the uglier and longer lasting the consequences. See World War I for details. These are not complex observations, but they seem lost on our leadership class. Alone among candidates running for the Republican nomination for president, Vivek Ramaswamy dared to suggest that actually going to war with Iran might not be in America's national interest. And for saying that, Mike Pence immediately denounced him as gutless and unpatriotic or something. But we thought it might be worth hearing more. Vivek Ramaswamy joins us now. Vivek, thanks so much for coming on. So if I'm reading this correctly, you suggested, while offering what seemed like real sympathy to the Israeli people, and to the many murdered there 2 days ago, you noted that maybe it's not in America's best long-term interest to declare war on Iran. Is that what you said?
I actually said this long before this crisis when people were thinking clear-headedly. And I just want to say a couple of things that are obvious but important, Tucker. I mean, what happened against Israel, you said it, I believe it. It is barbaric, it is medieval, It is wrong. And Israel as a nation absolutely has the right to self-defense, to its own national existence. And I think they should have our moral and diplomatic support as an ally. But there's one element of this that nobody's talking about. What the hell went wrong with U.S. and Israeli intelligence and the Israeli defense that allowed this to happen? Everybody seems to be punting that as a question for later. I think it's a question for now, if you're Israel. I mean, look, I think that Nikki Haley, I disagree with you a little bit there. I don't think she's a child. I think that she is somebody who is, like many politicians, in a position to get wealthier from war. Look at the military contracting business and otherwise. But put that to one side. The message that I would send would be very different. Get to the bottom of what allowed this gaping hole of intelligence and defense to even happen before feeding that same beast. If a doctor told you his job was to keep you from getting cancer and then you got that cancer, don't go trust that same doctor to remove your tumor. They don't let airplanes, when they crash, the pilots or the people who crash the airplane, that airliner is not the one who reviews the black box. And so I think those answers have to come now. That's not a question for later. And I think one of the learnings for the U.S., I think there's a lot of learnings for the U.S., Tucker, but one of the learnings is if that establishment can get it wrong in Israel from a U.S. perspective, that could happen right here at home. And if anything, as an ally, one of the things that we need to wake up to is that we're vulnerable here in the United States to the same. And so we can do some things to prevent that, secure our border, stop funding. I mean, I think one of the things that's been wrong in the U.S. is we have a bad habit while we're bankrupt funding both sides of wars that should have been avoided in the first place. Look at the money that's indirectly found its way to Hamas, the $6 billion paid to Iran in the recent ransom. That was a disaster. Yet we're effectively now funding both sides of a war that we shouldn't have been in the first place in places like Russia and Ukraine even. Think about how we hampered oil production in the United States and then now has funding, U.S. funding going to Ukraine in fighting back against Russia. It's a bad habit in the United States, and we need leaders here who will look after what advances American interests. And I find what Dan Crenshaw said to be cringeworthy. It is shameful. World War I was supposed to be the war that ended all wars, that got us to World War II. That can't be the way that we run foreign policy. The job of American leaders is to advance American interests, and I think we support Israeli leaders asking what advances and defends Israel as we should, morally and diplomatically, but leaders here need to look after American interests first.
It's a wild view, I know, that American leaders should be looking after American people and what's in their best interests. It's a wild, wild view. Somebody working on the border crisis, someone working on the drug crisis, someone working on the flash mobs of looters that just appear and get arrested and are released the very next day. I know, it's wild. But Ben Shapiro actually did have a problem with that, and most people do. Oddly enough, most people do have a problem with anybody right now saying Americans should put Americans first. I don't understand it. It does. The only reason, if America continues to not look after its own interests and its own citizens, it will no longer be the entity who other countries can look to for funding, for aid, for backing when it comes to a war. Eventually, someone like Nikki Haley should be focused on the American people, not focused on screaming out, finish them like she's a Game of Thrones character. It's absolutely ridiculous. And I'm so glad I just made a video yesterday about Joe Rogan's take, and I was echoing these exact things. And I'm so glad Tucker saw it the same way, and that Vivek sees it the exact same way. Because who else is going to fix the problems other than the leaders? You can't have this continuous way of looking at things. I'm going to throw up the Ben Shapiro clip right now. Can't have this continuous way of looking in every other place other than where your problems are. You can't keep doing it. You just can't. So again, I get why Ben Shapiro's upset. He's emotionally charged. There's something heinous going on right now. He's hoping every single person that he's ever gotten the back of also has this whole situation's back as well. Tucker Carlson tends to call it the way he sees it. Ben Shapiro didn't like that so much. So now we're going to hear Ben Shapiro throwing a fit at what Tucker Carlson has to say. Let's go.
And again, I want to add my voice to that because I'm a human being. But
oh, sure you do.
You
sound very outraged.
The outrage among Republican presidential candidates was so much more intense. One of them took to a bullhorn and started yelling about it. I get it. But no one would think to do that about the 100,000 American young people murdered every year. And
because who are you yelling at? Who are you yelling at? First of all, people are on bullhorns yelling about drug overdoses and the open border all the time. All the time. What is he even talking about? What he's attempting to is minimize what happened in Israel. He's not attempting to maximize what happened in the United States. He's attempting to minimize, as though America can't walk and chew gum, morally speaking, at the same time, which is absurd. And those two things are nothing alike. I'm sorry, that is not alike. It is not alike for drug smugglers to smuggle drugs over the border, which someone then takes and shoves into their arm and then they die of an overdose. That is not the same thing. I promise you, it is not the same thing as a terrorist breaking into your home and murdering your children in their beds in front of you and dragging your wife off to be raped in Gaza. That is not the same thing. Pretending that it is immoral. It's a moral blight. It's idiocy. It's just moral stupidity at the highest level. Of course we should care about what happens with fentanyl. Of course we should care about, we should close our border. Have I been unclear about this? Of course America should have closed borders when it comes to this sort of stuff. I'm on the same side as Tucker on that. I just don't understand why he's not on my side when it comes to Hamas has to be wiped off the face of the earth.
He is on your side when it comes to that. The problem is he's not on his side enough. He wants him to be on his side the same way Nikki Haley is. He wants him to be on his side where he's screaming about only that and not focusing on and pushing aside any other American issue. That's just not how everybody's going to feel. And again, you know, Vivek, he said it well. They should be able to defend themselves, and America should be there diplomatically and morally. 100%. But when Ben says something about closing the border, and he agrees that the border should be closed, well, that takes manpower. That takes focus. If every other leader is focused elsewhere right now, then that doesn't happen. You can't just push that aside. And also the way he tried to kind of blame what's going on with the drug crisis on the addicts, on the people that are doing it to themselves. Yes, it's their fault, but also open borders are not just a problem when it comes to drugs. That's not the only problem when it comes to open borders. It's also who's coming in. Who's coming in completely unchecked. Completely unchecked. Fake ID, no ID. Which way to Chicago? Which way to St. Louis? I'm going to New York. Bye. This bus will take me. Where do I stay now? Wherever I want? I don't like the way this American citizen's looking at me. It's a very bad situation. And people really aren't giving it the due that it needs. Now, all of a sudden, people are like, well, you know, there could be some kind of attack in America. It's like, yeah, the leaders need to be focused on the borders. They need to be closed up. They need, there's so much that needs to be done. When Ben Shapiro says morally chew gum and walk at the same time, that's two things. America has a border to look after. They have loot, because a lot of the looting and the rioting that's happening in Chicago and LA with the smash and grabs, these are American citizens. So now they have the border, they have the looting and the rioting that's happening randomly, which is, those people need to be put in check. The police need more funding in order to do that. The police need their hands untied. American people are being attacked via food prices, via not being able to own a home and the interest prices there. This is not chewing gum and walking at the same time. This is chewing gum, skipping rope, talking to somebody, and sending a text message at the same time. This is a lot of stuff. And believe me, some people can pull that off. Some nations may be able to pull that off. But guess what? America cannot. And right now, it is proving that it cannot. You can't have Joe Biden looking every single other place other than what's going on in his backyard. There are literally people who are like, hello, sir, I'm from East Palestine. Our water is still thick and it lights on fire. Can you please? Oh, I got to go to India, actually. I got to do some stuff. Oh, sir, Flint. I'm from Flint. Oh, I'm so thirsty. There's no water. I have to walk so far to another state to get water. I have to bring it back. Can you please? I got things to do. There's Ukraine stuff going on. Sir, somebody just trashed my business and the police said they won't show up. I got other things. You can't keep doing this. Sir, I live in Texas. 1,000 people ran across my ranch the other day. And I think 10 of them are still here somewhere. I need help. Just leave them alone. Don't worry. They'll be fine. Give them tents. You can't keep doing this. Biden, the government, the leaders, they need to start focusing on America. And again, that's not to say that Israel shouldn't be defending themselves. It's not to say that to minimize what's going on there. It's wild. It's absolutely wild. There's wild stuff going on everywhere. I'm watching Ukrainian, Russian videos every day. There's some wild stuff going on in the woods between those two factions. A lot of war going on over there. There's wild stuff happening in Africa, South America. There's wild stuff going on everywhere. But on top of all that, there's wild stuff happening in America right now. And they need the room and the space to focus. It's like every single time something dies down, this Ukraine stuff still going on, not to minimize what's happening in Ukraine, but it dies down in the media and all of a sudden there's another thing to look at. People finally lost their Facebook filters of like a Ukrainian flag. It was a pride flag. It was a Black Lives Matter flag. And then it was a pride flag. Then there's a Ukraine flag. And as soon as you got a little space, all of a sudden it has to be another flag. Americans need to focus on themselves. That's not a bad thing. Because when things are going good with Israel, they focus on themselves. Like if none of this was happening, they'd be focused on themselves and their own growth. China's focused on itself and its own growth. Russia's focused on itself and its own growth. Canada's focused on itself, kinda, and its own growth. America needs to do the same thing. Because America, although it's happening in a lot of different places, America is where it's happening the most. There's an attack within going on. And the only way that you can remedy an attack within is to start focusing on what's going on in your vicinity, in your states, in your cities, in your country. And that's not an unfair thing to say. You can have great sympathy for what's going on over there and the absolute atrocities and the barbaricness that's going on, and condemn that and say that's disgusting. And I hope everybody who's committed those terrible crimes, war crimes, I might even say, and then also say, but I have some stuff going on at home that I really got to deal with. I don't think that's the craziest thing in the world to say. Anyways, guys, if you haven't liked already, hit that like button. If you haven't subscribed already, hit that subscribe button. And I am CoachColin.com. Get yourself a beautiful shirt. We have all sorts, 10% off. I am Coach Colin, all capital letters, all one word, one L in the name Colin, and I'm out.